Radio check. Anybody copy? Hello, friends. I'm Alice Kaniklan, and this is episode 6, Decolonization on Coffee and Quack. Coffee and Quack is a podcast I created to celebrate and explore contemporary native life in urban Alaska. This episode, we explore a buzzword that I have heard consistently since moving back to Alaska. The concept of decolonization. What is decolonization? What does it mean to be colonized? How has colonization affected our thoughts and feelings about ourselves as Alaska Native people? And how can we motivate ourselves to act with strength and positivity rather than victimization or anger? These are big questions, folks, and I thought I knew what decolonization meant until I decided to do a podcast episode on it. So, to help me unravel this knot, I interviewed 2 powerhouse orators that I know, Ayyu Qassataq and Alvanna-Stimpfle. Decolonization is the bureaucratic, cultural, linguistic, and psychological divesting of colonial power. Basically, it's the indigenization of all the powers that be. It involves restoring the Indigenous worldview, restoring cultural and traditional ways, and replacing Western interpretations of history with Indigenous perspectives of history. To be honest, I felt a little uncomfortable at first, because it kind of feels a little anti-white, which bothers me because I totally love and respect my non-Native friends and family, and I don't want to come from a hateful or discriminatory place. But notice that the definition has nothing to do about not loving your non-Native family, but rather it addresses the systematic reclamation of the Native ways of life. Here, Ayyu explains her definition of decolonization.
So decolonization, I think is one of those steps. It's kind of the concentrated effort to untangle and understand how the colonial mentality has suppressed who we are and our knowledges, and starting to understand the ways that shows up, taking the red pill. But for healing to happen, it can't just be removing those things, removing the colonial things, because we're never going to remove all of it, first of all. But it has to also be about what is the infusion of reclaiming and living and breathing who we are, the indigenization, right, that happens. Graham Smith, the Maori scholar, calls it conscientization. And it's kind of like manifesting and bringing into your life the things that help you to be whole. So decolonization is a piece of it, but it's almost like the detoxing a little bit. It's like, okay, so what are you going to replace it with? What's the goodness you'll replace it with? Ayyu rurunga, ungalaklik mi rurunga, abaka delaluk lu banyu Qassataq, angayuchak dag lu sitat kun kutkuk herdman, kidunraka kuduchuk lu delaluk, beniga kanigluk, nukachliga inuatlirak. I am Ayyu Qassataq. I'm from Ungalaklik, Unakleet. My grandparents were Stanton and Irene Kitchtag. My parents are Doug and Vernita Herdman. And my beautiful children are Guduchok, Delaluk, Kanigluk, and Inuatlirak.
Ayyu legally changed from her English and anglicized names to her existing Inupiaq names. I sat down with her in my kitchen with my mom, Arlene Ekelin, sharing stories over muktuk and airplane noise.
I've gone by Ayyu my whole life, but I would say in the last year and a half, it just happened really naturally. I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and in going through treatment, I decided that I would be very kind of open about what I was experiencing as I was experiencing it, and just kind of sharing what that journey was like for me. And I was really I was shocked by all the support that I got from everywhere. It completely blew me away. And it just happened naturally. Just this shift, I don't even know exactly when it happened, this shift happened where it's just, everyone just called me Ayyu. And it was it got to a point where when people would say Jory, it would hit my ears weird. Be like, Jory just feels not right anymore. Wow. So that's my alter ego now. kept it as my middle name because I was like, okay, there are people who've known me my whole life as Jory, and they're never going to shift. And that's cool. But even with Ayyu, I make people pronounce it right. People will try to say Ayyu or Ayyu, or you know what I mean? Like, it's just like just off a little, and so I stop them and I say the emphasis is on the beginning, Ayyu, and then just say it quickly, Ayyu, and then I just make them say it over and over again. And if they act funny about it and say, this is my name, it's important to me that you say it right. And they're like, oh, okay. You know, because too much people try to belittle our languages. I remember a friend of mine, she named her daughter a beautiful Inupiaq name, and she was working in DC, and her boss was like, oh, what's her name? And she told her, she's like, oh, honey, you're going to have to give her a nickname or something. No one's going to call her that. And she was like, no. No. It's something that's important to them. They'll learn. I was talking with this young lady. She's a teenager in Fairbanks, and she's Navajo, and she has a Navajo name. And I was like, every time she would say her name, I was like really trying to listen hard to catch the kind of nuance of how to say her name. And so finally I was like, can you pronounce your name for me? Like, just really clearly, I want to hear it. And, you know, she kind of like laughed it off, and she was like, oh, you know, I don't even really know how to pronounce it. You know, you can just call me whatever. And I was like, no, don't be like that. And she said, nobody pronounces it right anyway, so I don't even know what the right way to pronounce it is. And I said, you know what? Learn how to say your name exactly how it's intended to be said, and then pay attention to who tries, and pay attention to who makes that effort to say it exactly right, because that'll tell you a lot about that person. She was like, it's true. When people are any old way with your name,
yeah,
says a lot about them. I had an experience about 6 years ago that really brought a lot of clarity to me in understanding what has happened to us. And I've shared it in different spaces because it's not just my story. I know that it's our story. And I've asked my mom for permission to share it, and she said, you need to share it with lots of people because it's the truth. You know, growing up, my mom was alcoholic, and I was around a lot of family who were alcoholics, and there was a lot of dysfunction. And when I grew up and became a mother, I found myself becoming very angry at my mom for what I felt were her failures as a mom, the ways that she didn't protect me, the situations that I was part of because of her alcoholism, all the conversations that we never had as women that I really needed to have had. And so I was really angry at her, and our relationship had gotten pretty toxic and just really dysfunctional. Our communication was really bad. And it got to a point where I actually made the decision that it was going to be better for my life and for my kids' life for us to no longer be in each other's lives, that we were going to go our separate ways, and I wanted nothing to do with her, and I didn't ever want to speak to her again, and I didn't want her to have anything to do with my kids. And I had come to a place where I felt like I had peace with it. Like I had compartmentalized it so tight that I felt like a relief for making that decision, and that everything was okay. You know, fast forward about 8 months, I traveled to Aotearoa, New Zealand, and I was pregnant with my youngest. I didn't know if I was having a boy or a girl, but he was a he. And actually I felt him kick for the first time while I was down there. And we were there for 2 weeks. And the entire time, from the time that we landed to the time that we took off, we were with our Maori brothers and sisters the entire time. So we were just completely taken care of. And everywhere we went, we were in ceremony. And it was transformative. And in their ceremonies, they create space for other Indigenous people to share back, to share our language, to share our songs, to share our dances, to share, you know, our brilliance. No English, like only indigeneity. That whole first week that we were there, you know, going through all these ceremonies, I found myself really grieving because I felt mute. I felt like I wanted to express myself, and I wanted to give back to them, but I didn't have it to give. I didn't have my language. I didn't have our songs. I didn't have anything to offer back. And so I felt mute, and I felt a lot of grief. And it was really hard. I felt really despairing at how much loss has happened, and feeling like if I'm the conduit to make sure that my kids are strong in who they are as a new people, I have so little to give them, just feeling a lot of loss. And then going into the second week, I went to an Indigenous research conference, and there was an Australian Aboriginal woman researcher who was presenting her research. She was talking about how, as a researcher, she became very curious about the mother and daughter relationships in her family, because when her daughter had a daughter, so her granddaughter, for the first time in her life, she experienced a feeling of overwhelming love and affection and protection, and it was the first time in her entire life that she had ever experienced that emotion. As a researcher, she was questioning, where did this come from? Why am I just now feeling this? And why am I feeling it for my granddaughter, but I never felt this for my daughter? So she was trying to peel back the layers and understanding the mother and daughter relationships in her own family. And so she was thinking about her own mother and her auntie, who were part of the stolen generation in Australia, those who were taken from very, very young ages and sent to become slaves on farms in Australia. So her mom and her auntie were taken from their families at very, very young ages and sent to one of these farms. And when they were teenagers, they escaped and they made their way to Sydney. You know, eventually her mom went on to put herself through nursing school. She became married. She had her daughter. You know, life continued on. And so she was thinking back over her childhood and her relationship with her mom. She was thinking like, yeah, you know, my mom was never affectionate with me. She never told me that she loved me. She never told me she was proud of me. Like, all these feelings that I'm feeling for my granddaughter now, I never received that from my mom. And that's normal, right? You just, you know, when you're a child, what's normal is what's normal. And so when she grew up and became a mother, she treated her daughter in the same way, just kind of distant, you know, was not loving and affectionate that way. She had this moment of realizing that because her own mother had been taken from her mother at such a young age, she had never had the opportunity to be raised with that nurturing, loving relationship to grow into the Aboriginal woman and mother that she was intended to be. That was completely disrupted. And so as I was listening to her kind of like walk through the generations and understanding where that disruption had happened in her own family, and to realize that that was not actually normal, you know, I was halfway across the world and I finally understood what happened to our people. I finally understood what happened to my mom and to us. You know, realizing that, you know, my mom was sent away to boarding school, but the disruptions are more than just the boarding school. Just colonization and the psychological violence that was inflicted on our people that has made us feel less than creates separation even from ourselves inside, and the ways that we internalize those things and how it shows up in our life, you know. So for the first time, like I finally understood that the dysfunction between my mother and I didn't belong to us, that it had been planted a long time ago. That was probably one of the most transformative experiences of my life, to realize that. When I flew back, when we landed in LA at LAX, it happened to be my mom's birthday. I called her and I told her what had happened, and we cried on the phone. Since then, we've been working really hard to try and push past the things that make our throats tight, where we would normally just compartmentalize and not speak until enough time had passed that we could act like it hadn't happened, which is how we would normally do it. We're trying to push through those things and actually talk about it. And it's been really beautiful. It's been hard, but I feel so thankful and so blessed that we've lived long enough to have this experience, and that it's happening while my own daughter is 7. You know, she's 7 now.